Eagles Entertainment.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got a bit of an NFL matchup feel to the show today. And it all starts with Pick 6, where I welcome in my friend Greg Cosell to dive into the cornerback position. It's a spot that seems, more players drafted every year than any other position. And that's because every team needs them. Everyone wants them. No team feels like they don't need more depth or talent at the cornerback spot. You've got to stop NFL passing games. And while the guys we were discussing with Greg Cosell aren't necessarily going to be depth pieces, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty at this position with Greg and really break down the top 6 names available in this class. We'll break down Greg's 5 favorites, and then I'll ask him about a guy that maybe people aren't talking about enough. After that, though, we're also going to stay with the NFL matchup theme, because next up on Mr. Relevant this week, I'm psyched to welcome in Greg's co-host on the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN, and that's Matt Bowen, longtime NFL safety. He's going to break down the top safeties in this class. Matt's been on this show and on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast a handful of times before. I feel like I learned something new every single time he appears on one of my shows, and I think that will once again be the case here today. So we'll cover the top corners with Greg. We'll do the top safeties with Matt, and then we'll transition to Draft Buzz with Ben Fennell, where we once again dive into another mock draft, this time from our good buddy on the other side of the state, Matt Williamson from Pro Football Network. What were some of his surprise picks in his mock draft this week? Which selections did we like most? Were there fits that we liked? I know some of you listening are Eagles fans. Most of you listening are Eagles fans. Well, we'll get into who Matt has the Eagles taking as well, because it's a name that isn't typically mocked to them all that often. So we'll break all of that down in that segment before we wrap things up with Draft Mailbag, where I've got a great question from you guys at home about the wide receiver position and comparing Devontae Smith from Alabama to Jamar Chase from LSU. So we'll get to that before I close this episode down. Before we get things started, though, I wanted to remind you once again, head on over to our Apple Podcast page or to our Stitcher page. Leave a rating, leave a comment. Not only is it the best way to get your voice heard here on the show, but it also just helps us out. It pushes us up the rankings. You guys have been great all off season long, really going back into the fall, of leaving comments, leaving questions, mock drafts, questions about rankings. It could be a question about a position like we got today. Really appreciate everybody that has done that. Keep it coming. We're getting closer to the NFL draft. Fans all over the country, all over the world are looking for draft podcasts. If you can go on and leave us that rating, leave us that comment, that boosts us up the rankings and makes it more available to those that are looking for that kind of content. Also, before we get rolling, I just wanted to also give you guys a heads up on an episode of the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast this week earlier, where I welcomed in former NFL tight end Anthony Beck to the show, and we talked about the tight end position as a whole. And one of the big things I asked him was, look, help me with scouting tight ends. What are some of the things that you look for at the position and the things that you value that really stick in the league? The guy played for 12 years, so he knows a thing or two about making it in the NFL. He's helped train young guys that have gone to the league and found success. He's doing that once again, so excited to welcome Anthony to that show. You can go check that out over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. All right, now let's get this episode of the Journey to the Draft podcast rolling. We're now going to start things off with Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, well, let's get started here talking about some defensive back play as our buddy Greg Cosell joins us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Greg, you ready to talk some corners?
I am, and I've been doing some corners, and corners are kind of fun to watch, because they come in all shapes and sizes with different skill sets and traits. So I kind of enjoy watching corners.
Yeah, we've talked about them on previous weeks here on the show, and it's fun too, because everybody can have differing opinions, because based on your previous experiences, you may value one kind of body type or one set of skills over another. So you might look at some of these top names and have them in completely different order than somebody else that you might really, really respect, and have completely conflicting views on all these guys. And
I will say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say one thing. One thing that I've come to the conclusion, and in speaking to some coaches, what I always hear is that it's really difficult to evaluate a corner highly if you don't feel he can line up and play man-to-man coverage in the NFL.
Yep.
Because at some point you're going to have to play man coverage. So if people really like a corner, but then say, oh, he can only play zone, he's a zone corner, there's a value to that, no question. Obviously, teams play zone as well. But at some point in this league, you're going to have to line up and play man-to-man coverage.
Yep, and it's something that certainly I think we're going to get into here today. And the first guy I want to ask you about is Patrick Surtain Jr. from Alabama. You watched his dad when he was going to Pro Bowls with the Miami Dolphins. But let's talk about the younger one. What have you seen from Surtain watching him on film?
He is a fun watch. I mean, to me, he's almost the kind of guy that was born to play press man coverage.
Yep.
Now, we'll get to another guy. He went to American Heritage High School in Florida, and the other corner at that high school with Patrick Surtain was Tyson Campbell out of Georgia. I guess it was kind of tough to throw the ball against American Heritage back then.
That would be my assumption. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he has prototypical size, length. He's an elite press man-to-man corner with elite coverage traits. And there's always, as we said, a place for that in the NFL. The only possible thing you could say about him is that he's probably not going to run a 4.4. He doesn't have great speed. And if you watch the Tennessee tape, you saw Josh Palmer run by him a few times. But he's got length, short area quickness. He can play both physical press man and mirror match press man. He's got tremendous patience and discipline. He never looks like he's working hard, Fran, to do his job, and he does it really well. He's smooth, but yet compact. He has light feet, but yet he's technique sound. He's just a fun guy to watch. I mean, to me, he will transition very, very well to the NFL.
I think that there's so much has been talked about, with his father and he was born to play press man. He's been groomed for this since he was a kid, and all of that is true. But all of that kind of overshadows the fact that this kid came in as a true freshman and started for maybe the best secondary coach in the history of football in Nick Saban. We talked about this with Minkah Fitzpatrick when Minkah came out, and it's kind of getting swept under the rug with Surtain that, he came in day one and started a corner for Nick Saban. That is a hard thing to do. And this kid has done it with flying colors.
And it also speaks to his mental toughness because Nick Saban is not the kind of coach that puts his arm around you and sings Kumbaya when he's telling you you're doing something wrong.
Yep.
So you have to be mentally tough. And Surtain, that's probably where his dad really helps him in that regard because, at the end of the day, you got to get coached. But this kid he can roll out of bed and play mirror match press man. He can also play off coverage with a high degree of efficiency. I thought he understood route concepts and route combinations. I thought he had a really nice feel for spacing and eye discipline. He was an aggressive tackler on the edge. That was a strength of his game. So he's not just a guy that covers. To me, he was the most complete corner prospect in the draft.
And I think the tackling aspect of this, we'll talk about this with some other guys as well, is so important in today's game when you talk about all the RPOs, the quick hitting throws, the screen game, all of those things. People say, tackling run game. No, it's about you talk about the quick RPO slants, the bubble screens, all of that, the jet sweeps. Yes. You're trying to get guys on an island on the perimeter. You need your corners to be able to make those one-on-one tackles in today's game.
Offenses are trying to isolate corners, even in base run games. How many times do we see base run games blocked in a certain way where the boundary corner is the unblocked player?
Yep.
And he's got to be able to tackle. You see that all the time. And no, that's a strength of Patrick Surtain's game.
All right, let's get over to another guy that a lot of people would argue is the top corner in this class, and that's Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech. If you look at Surtain and say this guy was groomed to play this position from day one, Farley, very, very green to the position, was a high school quarterback, got to Virginia Tech as a receiver, made the switch a couple of years ago, opted out this past year, so just has not played a ton of football in the secondary, but the traits are tantalizing. What did you see from him on film last year?
And it's funny, again, because we don't have official height weight numbers. What you see on the internet is that they're essentially the same in terms of height weight, but Farley's built totally differently. Yeah. He's a stockier, firmer build. He's got a well-built frame where Surtain looks thinner. So you're dealing with a guy that's a higher level corner prospect than Farley's. As we said, solidly built, strong frame, but he has powerful and explosive movement traits to go with that frame. I think at this point in time, because he doesn't have a ton of experience, he's far more comfortable and efficient playing press man than playing off coverage. I think his size, his patience, his athleticism really stood out when he played press man. I think he needs more refinement playing off coverage with his footwork, his balance. I thought his eye discipline at times was lacking when he played off coverage. I don't know what your feeling was, but he certainly has the physical and athletic traits to play any coverage effectively. I think it would make the most sense for him to go to a team that features man coverage as its foundation with a healthy dose of press man. To me, he'll face a little bit of a learning curve in the techniques and nuances of off coverage, and NFL teams will be aware of that.
Yeah, he did not play a ton of press at Virginia Tech in that scheme. It was like in the teens, I think, the amount of snaps he but when you look at his traits and say, all right, with his length, with his lateral quickness, with his recovery speed, like this guy is built for a press man scheme. And again, for a guy who hasn't played a ton, to kind of make it easier for him to kind of isolate his role, say, hey, all you have to do is cover this guy. That can, kind of ease his transition to the NFL for sure.
But he just looks like a bigger, more powerful athlete than Surtain, even though, as I said, what you see on the internet, the height weight looks the same. They're just built differently. He just moves like a more explosive athlete, whereas Surtain just moves like an effortless athlete.
So before we transition to J.C. Horn, do you feel, Greg, that people looking at this cornerback class, is it two guys in the top tier or is it three in your mind? Do you feel like J.C. Horn belongs in that top tier, or do you feel it's those two guys and then a step down before Horn?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, to me, like I said, and then it becomes in the eye of the beholder.
No doubt.
Surtain's number one.
Yep.
I think Farley would be number two, and I think Horn would be three, the way I see it. Right now, although I'll give you a guy in a minute who I really liked the more I watched him, but I think Horn, some could view Horn in that category because he's another guy that has the size, length, physicality, competitiveness profile that is in demand in today's NFL. Yeah. He's long, he's athletic, he's physical, he's competitive. That really stands out. This kid's competitive. The only thing I think that's really could be problematic is that he was very handsy and grabby through receivers' route stems, well beyond 5 yards, which is allowed in college, but that's not going to happen in the NFL. And you know who was like that coming out of college? Not as big as Horn, but it was a guy who I think was a top 12 pick, who everybody loved, was Trey Waynes coming out of Michigan State.
Interesting.
And he struggled in the NFL because Waynes was very handsy and grabby, and he never quite got over that. He's had a lot of PI penalties in the league, and he was the 11th overall pick. So, I think Horn has all the athletic and physical traits you want. He checks all the boxes, and he can play press man. Without question, he can play press man. I think you just have to, you're going to have to teach him to get out of the handsy, grabby thing. But when he played against Seth Williams from Auburn, I'm sure you watched that game.
Yep.
He just dominated him.
The competitiveness is what always kind of stood out, and that a little bit of a double-edged sword. You talk about the grabbiness, but the competitiveness from snap to whistle really, really stood out to me. And I know that that's something that a lot of people will point to and say that's why he's my favorite corner, or that's why I like him over Surtain, or I like him over Farley, as he's just got that edge to him that a lot of people look for on the boundary.
Yeah, and he's like that. I mean, but the thing is, they're going to have to coach out of him the handsy, grabby stuff because in the NFL they call that.
Yep. All right, let's get to our next guy. This is a player that a lot of people feel could be in this first round discussion and potentially as early as the top 20, top 25, and that's Greg Newsome from Northwestern. I know a player that you have studied. What have you seen from Greg Newsome, and how do you feel that he will best transition to the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, to me, and we know his numbers because they had the pro day, he's a long, thin frame, sleek-looking corner. He's got a lot of experience playing both man and zone. He's a little high cut and long legged, but he's very, very smooth. He's got natural quickness. He's an outside corner.
Yeah.
There were times I thought he was sudden and twitchy, particularly when he drove forward, planted and drove forward. But for the most part, I think he ended up being a little more smooth than really twitchy overall. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I had discussed that, and I think you probably agree. I think, is he a boundary corner at the next level? Versus the bigger, more physical ex-receivers in the NFL. He's 192 pounds. Obviously, he's got a very good vertical jump based on his pro day. He had a really good 10-yard split. We saw his 40 time. It was 4.4 or below. I think he's got a lot of traits. There's one thing he needs to work on, and this is something I was taught a number of years ago by a DB coach to look at when you watch corners in press man. He showed a tendency to take a false step in press man coverage, which at times put him immediately on his heels. That's something I always look for. And you got to be careful with that in the NFL, because you do that in the NFL, and guys can run by you, no matter how good you are, how smooth you are, all that. That can be coached, but sometimes that's a natural, just a natural foot move. So I think that we'll see. Now, overall, I would say, and I'm curious your point of view here, Fran, I don't think he played to his timed speed on tape because he was a 4.38, 4.4 at his pro day. I don't think he looked like that on tape. What did you think?
That was honestly, that was one of the things I was going to say to you. I didn't quite see that level of recovery speed, especially late downfield, that surge to recover late. I didn't quite always see that. I know watching, I believe it was was it the Purdue game? It was one of the early games from this past fall. I just didn't quite see it. And it's kind of similar to Horn. He would get very grabby. And there were times where, but what's weird with that is that when it came time to play the ball, I didn't feel that there was a lot of panic into his game. I thought that he did a nice job of whether it was turning to find it or just playing through the hands, playing out of phase and getting the ball on the ground. He only had one career interception, but he had 20 pass breakups over the course of his career. And I think that speaks to his ability. He's not necessarily a guy that's going to panic down the field, which is a good trait to have. But going back to the J.C. Horn discussion, a little bit handsy for sure through the route.
And I made that point. And to your other point, I made the note that he stayed poised and composed through vertical routes, did not get out of phase, and he did locate the football. Just because he didn't intercept it, but he did locate the football.
I think that in zone coverage too, he showed a really good feel for reading things around him. I mean, the interception was a thing of beauty, and that was kind of got a sense to see his route recognition and ability to react to things developing in front of him.
No, I think see again, so much of this to me is team-based.
Yep.
I viewed him as a solid corner prospect, not as an oh my God corner prospect.
Sure.
I think he's a solid corner prospect. He's got size, length, he's got athleticism, he's got movement traits that pretty much every team's looking for. And I think with his zone and man experience, he's a likely starter at outside corner. And I think you could see him down the road being a boundary corner.
Yep. We talk about this with offensive linemen all the time. If you are a solid starter at corner, you are a valuable player. Those could be hard to find for sure in the NFL. One guy I think that a lot of people think very highly of as well, especially in kind of like an off coverage scheme, would be Asante Samuel Jr., a name that Eagles fans are very familiar with. Obviously, his father playing here in the early 2000s. I want to get a sense of what you saw from Asante Samuel Jr. Watching him at Florida State.
Yeah, now to me, he'll be an interesting evaluation for teams because he played outside corner at Florida State. I don't know if teams will see him that way. He lacks height. He lacks length. He's not a burner. He did show some sticky mirror match press man coverage traits on the outside, plus some smooth twitch at times. But can he do that at the NFL level versus wide receivers who are 4 or 5 inches taller and potentially weigh 20 or 30 pounds more than he does? So that's a projection teams will have to make. Now, I thought he showed an aggressive nature. I thought he was willing to play physically and tackle. And I think that would help if teams saw him as a slot, which to me, I think he is. I kind of thought of him like a Mackenzie Alexander, Fran, when I watched his tape. And Mackenzie Alexander, as we know, played outside at Clemson, was a great corner in college, and he's become a very good slot corner in the NFL. I kind of see him that way. Now, if you see him as an outside corner, the player that came to my mind, now this guy's just a little taller, but I think they're similar in terms of their competitiveness, their aggressiveness, their feistiness. He kind of reminded me a little of Steven Nelson when he was at Oregon State.
Oh, interesting. I like that. I had not heard of that one. I think that, when you look at his 2020, everybody raves. Oh, this past season, he was outstanding because I watched him in 2019 as well. You see some of the good flashes, but I didn't think the consistency was there. A lot of people speak to how high quality that 2020 film was. The last question, Greg, that I've got for you is there a sixth player, because we've already covered 5 corners, is there a sixth that we didn't cover today that you feel like, hey, this guy's worth talking about up in this upper echelon of corners, at this position?
Well, me, I never know how guys will get drafted, but I'm kind of like Tyson Campbell from Georgia. He's the kid who played with Patrick Surtain in American Heritage. He was a 5-star recruit. Many recruiters thought more highly of Tyson Campbell coming out of high school than they did Patrick Surtain. I think he's one of the most interesting prospects in this draft. He'll be close to 6'2", probably 195-ish. few corners in this class, to me, match his traits profile and the level of college competition he played every week. I mean, size, length, athleticism, twitch, speed. He played a ton of mirror match. He played a ton of zone. So he's got experience doing both those things. Again, we don't know the kids. I don't get to talk, maybe once in a while if I talk to a coach, I'll ask about a kid, but normally I'm just enjoying watching the tape. So assuming he's a good kid, I think this kid really has traits that could lead him to be a really quality corner and maybe even one of those matchup corners when he, after he gets some experience in the NFL.
How do you compare him with his teammate, Eric Stokes?
I liked Campbell more. Stokes was very, very comfortable playing mirror match press man. I mean, that was his game, and he played it really, really well. He maintained contact with receivers. He rarely got out of phase. I don't think there was any physical presence to Eric Stokes whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. Whereas it's the opposite with Humphrey. I mean, he is about as physical and violent as it gets as a corner.
Right. And the thing about Stokes is, again, thinking about the league. You have to think about the league now. We're not just watching these guys in a vacuum. As you know, you and I have had this conversation for years. You got to put guys in the NFL. People say, well, because he's not big, he can play, slot. Well, no, he can't play slot because to play in the slot, you've got to be able to tackle in the run game. You got to be able to blitz. There has to be a physical and mental competitiveness to you that, to me, Eric Stokes did not show on tape. Now, I'm not going to say he's not competitive. That's a whole different thing. That's a character issue. But, he was not physically competitive watching tape. And you can't just say, well, I'm not sure he can play on the outside. Let's put him in the slot. I don't think you can necessarily do that, just say that reflexively about Eric Stokes. I don't think his overall traits lend themselves to being a slot corner.
Yeah, it's a fun class. I mean, there are a bunch of names we haven't even covered that I think if Yatu Melifanu from Syracuse is a really interesting watch. I mean, there's a bunch of guys, Aaron Robinson from Central Florida. It's a fun corner class, and it's always a fun position to discuss, as you mentioned at the top, Greg. But appreciate you shedding some light on some of your favorites here. 6 guys, really 7 to throw in Eric Stokes. Appreciate the evals, and we'll talk to you next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, excited to welcome back to the Journey to the Draft podcast a guy who's been on the show a couple of times before, and that's ESPN analyst, former NFL defensive back Matt Bowen. Matt, thanks for joining us here on the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Fran.
So I want to talk through the safety position with you because we talked through some of the top corners with Greg earlier in the show. And one name that has been such a lightning rod for analysis really for the last 6-8 months has been Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame. I don't even know if you evaluate him as a safety or if you see him as a linebacker, but I just wanted to ask you, when you have watched him, how do you kind of view his projection? How do you see him going into the NFL?
It's a great question. And I've talked with Greg Cosell, obviously my co-host at the matchup show, about him plenty. And I watched his tape last night. I watched his game against Florida State, both games against Clemson, obviously the game against Bama. And Fran, I see him as a safety. I know he played stack backer at Notre Dame. He played that overhang position at Notre Dame. But listen how, I think the key here, Fran, is where's the league going right now? Yep. We're seeing so much split safety coverages with that strong safety who can show the ability to roll down as a box defender, be schemed up on pressures, and play that overhang position. And when I watch his tape, he will strike you now on contact. He will strike you on contact. He's a great short area juice. And I think that's important when you're talking about a safety. Someone can close quick because think about, let's just look at it from a zone perspective. You're dropping to the curl. You're dropping to the hook. Do you have lateral change of direction ability? Can you drive top down on the football? And when you get there, do you get there with urgency and strike in your pads? And that's what I see with him. Now, look, I could be totally wrong. You could talk to an NFL scout and says, look, we love him as a stack backer inside. We like him as a Sam or a Will in our defense. But I think in your base coverages, can he play quarters? Can he stay on top of number 2? Can he open his hips and drive in the 7 route? I think he can based on his traits. Now, obviously, we're projecting now because you're having him play deeper in the field. Yep. But if he's in a position, Fran, where he can play top down, and then you get into now your sub packages, your nickel, your dime, maybe even your dollar, depending on where you're playing. The possibilities there, I think you have a ton of developmental upside with him. Can you scheme him in those situations where he can match to a tight end vertical, where he can add him to a pressure, when he can match him to the back out of the backfield. Now, look, I know he had slot reps at Notre Dame, okay? And I've always said this, slot reps, it's one thing, Fran, to cover down on a bench route or a quick slant, okay? You should be able to do that if you're a safety in the NFL. But it's another thing to match Cole Beasley on 3rd and 2 to 6.
All right.
Okay, we all know that. All right. That's a lot different, right? Because I'll tell you, matching to Cole Beasley, you have to have that mirror match ability. You have to have electric feet to slide with him and to mirror him off the football. So is he a true slot defender? No, he's not. And most safeties aren't, because that's why they play safety. But in this situation, I think he can play out in space as that overhang defender. And I think there's a lot of upside there with the proper coaching development, because I love the traits.
Yesterday over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, we did a little bit of a film study on Jeremy Chin with the Panthers and with Kyle Duggar with the Patriots, and with both of those guys, with how they were used underneath. They'd play curl flat. You'd play them in the hook curl. You'd match them up in a tight end or a back every once in a while. But everything in sub package, I just feel like Owusu-Koramoah, his skill set best translates to that kind of a role.
I agree. And what you're looking at there, the two players you mentioned, especially Jeremy Chin, if you watch his tape from his rookie season, he's disruptive.
Yep.
That's what you want those guys to be. You want disruptive traits there. Alignment and assignment is great. And that's day one of minicamp and OTAs. Okay, we all understand that. But you have to be a disruptive player, especially if you're a space player, a guy who's that overhang defender. You got to create disruption. You got to create impact plays. And I believe he can do that based on the traits.
I don't want him in traffic. I'll keep him away from all the stuff going on, in between the tackles. Let's keep him out in open grass and let him do some work. I want to ask you now about another safety who is in most first-round mock drafts, not all, but most first-round mock drafts. That's Trevon Merrick from TCU, the junior, who I believe won the Thorpe Award this year as the top defensive back. Interested to kind of get your evaluation and what you've seen from him during his time at TCU.
Yeah, I really like it. And I have my scouting report pulled up in front of me right now. I wrote up reports in the safeties. And I liked his film. Again, going back to our original discussion, what is TCU under Gary Patterson? Heavy split safety, a lot of quarters. Now, he can roll down. He can cover down. We've seen that. And he does have post ability. There's no question about that. Again, you're looking at the traits. Can he spin deep to the post? I think he can. He's got pretty good range. Now, there is some tightness in his hips that will show up on film. And I think he is a short strider. And for some people, they might say, well, is that going to translate to enough range in the NFL? Based on his college film, I think it does. And this is what I wrote right here, Fran. I wrote long linear frame with the short area speed to closing the ball. Split field range as a quarter deep half safety with on-the-ball production. That's important to me, on-the-ball production. And Fran, when you talk to people, they'll say, well, how many picks did he have? I would have liked to have 15 picks a year during my career too, okay? It doesn't always happen that way, okay? It doesn't always happen that way. The thing is, do you finish on the ball? I look at the PBU's passes broken up. I look at them as critical plays. Yeah. Especially based on game situations. There's a play on this tape against Baylor. It's a 4th down situation. He's matched versus the backside receiver on a crossing route. It's excellent coverage. He squeezes to the hip, undercuts the route, makes a play in the football, gets his team off the field. That's ball production to me. I put ability to match in coverage, rolling late in pressure schemes. A lot in the TCU film, they would blitz the slot and he would roll down. And again, that's what we're talking about with covering down in the slot, because you're going to get that in the NFL. You're going to get zone pressures out of nickel and dime. And if you got to be able to cover down over that slot, play top down the ball from an off-man position, drive in the underneath throws, match the verticals. He can do that. I think he's highly instinctual. You go back to the Oklahoma, film against Oklahoma, he's waiting on routes to break. Deep end breakers. He's sitting there waiting, opening. I call it an open angle technique, waiting for the route to break so he can make a play in the football. And I think he's a willing tackler to get ball carriers to the ground in space. Now, he's not a violent striker at the point of attack, but I always say this, even the high school kids I coach, you know what matters? Can you get the guy on the ground? Yep. That's what matters, especially the safety. Can you get the guy on the ground? Now, when he does fill or run the alley, Fran, I think he's a low wrap tackler, and that's fine. Again, because that's a technique he was taught, and he can get the ball carrier on the ground. I do think he's got first-round ability, and it just depends when that run comes. Because last year we saw it. It was at early day 2 when guys like Delpit and Winfield started to come off the board. It always depends on when the run starts at the safety position, but he does have first-round traits.
Yeah, you talked really about all the strengths I saw from his film. I was glad that you kind of dove into him playing top down over the slot, as opposed to just being a straight matchup guy. I feel like that kind of gets, kind of thrown in there with him. It's like, oh, he can play over the slot. I didn't quite see it as like, straight matchup against Cole Beasley, third and short. But I'm glad that you kind of you explained that to the listeners too, to give some clarity there. Another guy that I feel like has a really well-rounded skill set as well, Richie Grant from Central Florida. I want to kind of get your thoughts on what you saw from him. He was one of the stars down at the Senior Bowl. Has had a really productive last couple of years down there for the Knights. Interested to get your thoughts on Grant.
I really liked him. I really liked him, Fran, just because, one, his play style to me jumps in the tape. It jumps in the tape. Now, he's only listed at 200 pounds, but because of his game speed and because of his physical presence in coverage and as a run defender, I think he plays much bigger than his size. Now, I don't think he's got really high-end traits. I think he was a 2-star recruit coming out of high school. And that matters. I've talked to scouts and I've always had this question, does the recruiting stuff matters? And it does a little bit, because if you have traits as a senior in high school, you have traits when you're in college. You have high-end athletic traits. And I don't think Richie Grant has elite athletic traits, but man, just the way he plays the game. I think he's more of a split field safety. Now, he rotated to the post at times on a Central Florida film, and he has generated range in the middle of the field. But I think he's a cover 2 quarter safety who can roll down and be that overhang defender. Now, I'll tell you what, and I think you were down to Senior. Well, you weren't down to Senior Bowl this year, Fran, but you've seen the tape.
Watched all the tape. Yep.
Yeah. And Richie Grant did really well in one-on-ones. The reason he does that, in my opinion, because he's very patient. He keeps his shoulders square. He can transition on the football. He understands leverage and how to play the pocket at the point of attack. He's a very well-coached player, in my opinion. A very well-coached player, very disciplined player, very tough player. Who's a guy, and I always say this, I write a piece for ESPN every year, and I always put a category in there of these are the guys I would love to coach. And he has a lot of the traits I would look for as a secondary coach, because he can drive top down in the football. He will show up in the run game and run his feet and drive his pads on contact. He will make plays in the football. And when he has to cover down over the slot, he can match in the short area. I think he's a really, really good football player. And those guys are going to last in today's game because of the way defenses are scripted now.
I just feel like watching him, there were so many safeties in the league that maybe people aren't blown away by, how they did at the combine, or, what their just their physical traits are. But you go Micah Hyde and Kevin Byard and Jordan Poyer, and you go down the list, and all these guys. That's what kind of jumped off the film to me when watching Richie Grant. Is this guy just gets it, and he checks so many boxes. And I agree. I loved his play temperament, just the way that he attacked every play. Really, really stood out to me on film. With Grant, he didn't necessarily have that one that trait that you could kind of hang your hat on, like I mentioned. One guy who does have that, in my opinion, was Javon Holland from Oregon. And that trait, in my mind, was his ball skills. I thought just unique in terms of his ability to finish. Interested to kind of get your thoughts on him and how he was used with that Oregon defense going back in 2019, and what you saw from him and his projection.
Right. And he opted out of the 2020 season. So you got to go back to the 2019 tape. The tape's impressive.
Yeah.
Just starting with, and here's the thing I looked at right away. He's a punt returner. Okay. He's a punt returner. What that tells you is he's disciplined. He's got toughness. He's got ball skills right there.
Yep. Because
you can't put a guy back there who doesn't have those traits, man. You are in deep trouble. Doesn't matter if we're talking high school football on Friday nights or Saturdays in the college game or Sundays in the NFL. You have to have a guy back there who checks all those boxes. That was the first thing that stood out to him when I put on his tape in that opener against Auburn. He had a big return against Auburn. He's got natural ball carrier vision with the football in his hands. And that shows up when he's playing defense, when he make plays in the football. How he was utilized in Oregon is interesting to me. He was that overhang, almost like a slot safety. I guess that's the way I would term it. A nickel safety that wasn't really a matchup man guy. Could match, if you're playing a quarters match or a 3-match coverage scheme, he can match and carry the vertical, match and get it under the corner, drop to the curl hook, drive top down the football. I think he's excellent in space. That's what I'm really getting to here, Fran. I think he's got natural feel, natural awareness, natural instincts in space to make plays in the football, whether that's driving top down on a swing pass, working back inside, matching to a crosser. He made a play, I think it was against Washington State on his 2019 film. He carries his crosser basically across the field, undercuts the route, takes it to the house.
Right, yep.
And this is what I wrote on. I wrote long, high-cut safety with ball skills, body control, and toughness. Disruptive playmaking ability as a slot curl defender. Can play in space, post, split field, slot with the ability to key and diagnose urgent, competitive, and willing against the run. And that urgency jumps on the tape with him. It really jumps on the tape with him. Now, I think scheme fit will be very important because you're going to have to put him in a multiple defensive system that utilizes those disruptive traits. But I projected him as a nickel safety, with starting potential due to his ascending talent, because I think he's still developing. He's a younger player, didn't play last year, has no current tape. But you look at the 2019 tape and you say, okay, you mesh it with the special team skills and the traits that come with that. So this is someone that could fit in my secondary, but he has to be utilized the right way to get the most out of those disruptive traits.
Matt, you know who he reminded me of? And this guy played a different role in his defense in college, but was a converted corner early in his career. Juan Thornhill, when he was coming out of Virginia, you had those ball skills, you had the corner background. Just from a body type standpoint, the usage in college was different. Do you feel like I'm on the right track there with that kind of comp?
No, I think you are. And again, this is something I think is very important because I fall into this trap all the time, Fran, when I'm watching tape. Sometimes I watch it from a coaching perspective. And I think you got to watch it more from a traits-based perspective. What are their traits? What can they do, projecting into multiple systems?
Yep.
And Juan Thornhill is a great example because he can play the post. We know he can spin it 2 deep and play cover 2 and 2-man in Kansas City. He can match up where needed. He can run the alley as a run defender. There's a lot of things he can do because of his traits and his athletic profile. And I think you have to look at that with a guy like Holland. So I agree with you.
One other guy from the Pac-12 I wanted to ask you about, from USC, Talanoa Hufanga, made a bunch of plays this year. Interested to get your thoughts on how you feel he best translates to the league.
He's an interesting player because I like him he's got what I call forward ability. And what I mean by forward abilities, I like him more coming top down than playing as like a deep half defender or a quarter defender. And here's what I got my report pulled up right here, Fran. I said there's a physical element to his game, strength and power on contact, decisive in zone coverage, short area burst, the close, the hook curl defender. He's got pass rushing traits. If you watch the Pac-12, I guess it was a Pac-12 title game this year against Oregon. He showed the ability to set up blockers on pressure schemes and basically rushing as an edge defender, getting a tackle back in his heels and showing the ability to bend and rip underneath. I thought that was pretty impressive.
Remember the play, yeah.
Yeah, and I put here he projects to have sub-package ability. I think he's a dime safety. That's what I think he is, a dime safety or even a dime linebacker. Now, he's listed at 215. I don't have, until we have their pro day, their official weight, but he's 6'1", 215. He was disruptive this year. He made a lot of plays in the football. He's an alley runner who can be a physical presence for you in the box. And I think he has enough traits to play in space. No, I don't think he's a matchup defender. I don't want him playing a bunch of man coverage. And I don't want him in the deep half a bunch. I want him underneath so we can use that forward ability to make plays in the football and impact the run game as well.
Maybe I've been watching too much Chiefs. I'm looking at my notes. I wrote down Dan. I wrote down Dan Sorensen when I was watching him.
That's an interesting comp. That's a very interesting comp. But Sorensen does a lot of that.
Yeah.
He does a lot of that. Now, when and I'm not saying that he can't,
of course,
spin back and play cover 2 because he's going to have to. He's going to have to. And here's the thing: if you're a dime player, and that's great, but when you go to OTAs and minicamp and they haven't installed dime yet, you got to play as a base package player. And you have to show the ability to pedal, to open your hips, to transition in the football, to stay on top of routes. All those. Those cover charges that come with playing the safety position. It doesn't mean he can't do that. But Dan Sorensen has shown the ability that he can do that. You watch Kansas City, Kansas City is one of my favorite defenses to study because there's so much late movement in the skies under Spags.
Yeah.
And there's so much pressure under Spags. You have to do a lot of things in that defense.
Last question for you, Matt, before we cut you loose here. You've been awesome with your time. Is there a guy that I didn't bring up to you that you've studied over the course of the last couple of months that you feel is definitely worthy of bringing to the discussion?
I think Andre Sisco from Syracuse.
Interesting.
I think that's a name. 6 foot, 209, 210. Transferred to IMG Academy. Finished up his high school career there, went to Syracuse. This is what I wrote on him. I put broad muscular frame. He's got an NFL body at the position. He's got range and ball skills. I think he has natural range.
No doubt.
Ability to track and finish in the post or the deep half. Urgent and explosive as a top-down defender, driving on in breakers. Defensive playmaking ability. He had 13 career interceptions in college. 13. Yeah. And I think in 13 and about 24, 22 games, something like that. So a lot of on the ball production, high level ball production, where he's getting those PBUs, but also finishing with the interceptions. I just think he's got easy range in the post, man. I think post defenders are hard to find, Fran.
Yeah.
They're hard to find. A guy that has that natural ability, the natural instincts, know when to open his hips and knowing how to track the ball deep or create a downhill 45-degree angle to the football. I was impressed with this film. Now, he had an injury this year, didn't finish the season.
Yep.
That has to be taken into account. But, this is just based on tape. And based on tape, I think he can be a day 2 prospect that can develop into a starter at the NFL level. He should help you immediately on special teams because of his size and speed as a coverage guy on kickoff and punt. But I liked his tape. I like guys that make plays in the football. I really do. And I think there's a need right now in the NFL for post guys. Like I said, they're hard to find. They're hard to develop. So if you have someone who has that natural traits, that's someone I would really look at.
Big play league. You gotta create them and you got to take them away. And I feel like he certainly has that ability to take the ball away. Matt, this has been awesome. Thanks once again for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, shedding some insight on this safety group.
Thank you, Fran.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, back for another edition of Draft Buzz here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. My friend Ben Fennell. And Ben, we are going to go through another mock draft here this week. And this time we're going to go over to the Pro Football Network, which, by the way, just made a big addition to their crew. They're adding former ESPN host Trey Wingo to the staff there. But Matt Williamson, a friend of the show, he's been on the show a couple times, jumps on and we're going to give him a review of his mock draft. And so let's go first up. Most interesting
well, first of all, Fran, you have to note Matt made the bold move of dropping a mock draft mid-free agency. So this was posted about midday on Tuesday. So we'll see where things go in the next couple hours, the next day or two, as you guys are listening. There may be some more movements and maybe some needs we're taking care of, but that's the risk you run with, doing some content this time of year.
And Matt, as a former scout in the NFL and a guy who follows free agency very closely, I'm sure that this pained him to have to put out a mock draft in the midst of free agency, really before the new league year has even opened. For him to put this out, I'm sure it pained him. But alas, here we are, creating content off others creating content. Let's go through our most interesting pick in the top 12. I'll let you kick things off here.
Well, not so much an interesting pick, but starting to look at the kind of allocation of position groups and where they're going to go. We know quarterbacks are getting pushed to the top and everybody's mocked now, and that's really the way it trends. 5 QBs in the top 12, Fran. That's not the shocker. 2 QBs in the top 7. That is the shocker. Most mocks we're seeing now, we're starting to get to 4 in the top 5 quarterbacks going in the top 8. This one was a little more conservative. We still had the 5 going in the front half of the first round. And that caps off with the 5th quarterback taken, Trey Lance, number 12, to the San Francisco 49ers, who had a great pro day last week, showed off that strong arm. And I just love him in a system that's run first, play action boot. He's obviously going to be able to throw on the move, get him on the perimeter with some design rollouts and sprint outs and use his legs improvisationally. This guy is not a superhero, passer. He needs to be part of a system, a well-balanced play calling. And I think Kyle Shanahan's system is perfect for a Trey Lance type of prospect.
Let me ask you, do you feel that this draft is more likely to go that route where we see 4 go in the top 6 or something like that, do it with trades and things like that? Or do you feel like this is more likely to be a, go back to 2017 where, all right, Trubisky goes 2, but then the next one doesn't go off the board till 10 and Mahomes, then another one at 12. Do you feel like we'll see it more like this, that it's in Matt's mock? Or do you feel like it's more likely that everybody just kind of goes to the top and there's a lot of movement with teams trying to make a move?
I think the cream is rising to the top in this class. I think these prospects are too exciting. I think there's too much intrigue and ability with these quarterbacks and too many teams that need quarterbacks. So it's kind of that perfect storm. You can also peak a little bit in free agency, peak a little bit at that 2022 class. You better go all systems go at these quarterbacks because there may not be a whole lot of other options out there ensuing years or maybe on the waiver wire for you. So as we know, the quarterbacks get bumped up, but I think it's the perfect storm of a top heavy draft and a lot of teams that need it.
And that's what I think will be interesting. And look, I might as well just get into mine to continue this topic. But my most interesting pick was Mac Jones at number 8, the Alabama quarterback, going to the Carolina Panthers. And not only that, but going ahead of Justin Fields, who went number 9 to the Denver Broncos. So
and Fields and Trey Lance very often mocked to that Carolina spot in 8.
Right.
So kind of interesting that he decided to go with Mac there.
So I think there's a couple interesting points there. Matt Rule has gone on record, talked about what he looks for a quarterback. He's gone on various podcasts before he became the head coach with the Panthers, and just knowing Matt, I've known Matt for a decade plus. Like a lot of the intangible stuff is going to matter to him. I think when you talk about the clutch factor, guys that can come up in big moments, that stuff's going to matter to him. I will be interested to see if he was presented, let's say Trey Lance is off the board and it comes down to Mac Jones and Justin Fields. And if they view Mac Jones as that kind of player and they view Justin Fields as a franchise quarterback, if they like both guys, who would get the edge? And I feel like, Justin Fields with his second reaction ability, I think that puts him into certainly, that kind of allows him to have some early success. But, Mac Jones with his touch and consistent accuracy to all 3 levels, I think can kind of give him an edge in some people's minds as well. They coached Mac Jones down in Mobile. The owner, David Tepper, was in Mobile as well. So got to be around Mac Jones and kind of, up the comfort level with him as well. It's going to be interesting, man. I would be surprised if that was the selection, but Justin Fields falling to 9, I thought that was very interesting to see Mac jump him in this mock draft.
Do you feel some of these teams at the top of the draft taking quarterbacks are really going to give us a clear snapshot on their philosophical view on the quarterback position? And if you look at Carolina with, kind of for lack of better words, pick of the litter, let's say they had Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Mac Jones sitting there. I think that's a very clear kind of intent and philosophy on what Matt Rule and an extension of the offensive side want in the quarterback position. I'm really excited just to find out what some of these young kind of unproven coaches are all about philosophically and who they want under center.
Let me ask you a question, because obviously there are other decision makers in play here, right? You've got Fitterer, the GM. You've got Matt Rule as head coach. You're going to have the owner who's going to have a say whenever you have a quarterback selection that high in the draft. But if you were to look at Joe Brady's offense in a vacuum and you were to look just at these top guys, we'll just say Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, of those 3, who do you think best fits that system just in a vacuum with what we've seen over the last 2 years at Carolina and at LSU?
That's really funny because those 3 relied a lot on under center elements in the offense, particularly Trey Lance and Justin Fields, a lot of turning your back, a lot of play action. Joe Brady's system with Joe Burrow at LSU, heavy RPO. And I think that's kind of the misconception with Mac Jones being under center play action guy. Not really. He was much more of a shotgun RPO guy in that Alabama offense, making post-snap decisions. So I actually really like Mac Jones to fit that style of offense, despite his obvious limited mobility, limited, willingness to extend the play like Joe Burrow did at LSU, like Trey Lance and Justin Fields have the ability to. But I actually think Mac Jones, the way he played at Alabama and his post-snap decision-making and accuracy kind of fits that scheme better. Now, you think also Joe Brady, empty sets, spread formations, that really isn't Mac Jones' style either. So Joe Brady's had a couple different offensive schemes and philosophies through his time with LSU and the Panthers.
I do think, though, that it would behoove the Panthers, not necessarily, you're not making that selection based off who fits Joe Brady's scheme the best, because 2022, Joe Brady might be a head coach somewhere. If that offense doesn't last, if you have to change coordinators, now all of a sudden, we picked this guy because he was a good fit for this offense. Now we're changing schemes. You don't necessarily want that. So not that would be the deciding factor, but I just wanted to ask you just to see how you kind of felt about it. I'm interested to see where they ultimately end up going. The other part in this whole quarterback scenario is that you have potentially, and this is all according to reports, you've got 2 veteran quarterbacks that are potentially on the market right now and in parts of trade talks. You look at Deshaun Watson in Houston, you look at Russell Wilson in Seattle, would the Carolina, would the New York Jets, would even the Miami Dolphins be involved with any of these teams to try and see if they can get one of those 2 guys? I think that's what ultimately decides when these quarterbacks go off the board. If you have a quarterback go 1-2 in this draft, let's just say that it's, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, I feel like that kind of ups the ante a little bit. And now if you're Miami, you're sitting there like, all right, you want to get your quarterback, 2 just went off the board. You guys got to move up. If Miami's able to trade out, then yeah, I feel like there's going to be another trade at 4 or 5 to make sure that fourth quarterback goes off the board. If Miami stays put and doesn't take a quarterback, I think that's when, okay, now, we're going to see these guys fall a little bit into the double digits maybe, which, it's all part of the playing the draft. It's a lot of fun.
And real quick, before we put the quarterback conversation to bed, whether you're trading for a veteran, signing someone in free agency, going after one at the top of the draft, it's all about adapting, placating, adjusting to the skill set of the players you get. This whole era of forcing, players into your scheme, this is how it's run, this is how it should look, is over in the NFL. It is all about now adapting to the talent that you have, finding out what they do well, don't do well, and let's find a way to put them in positions to be successful. So when you're talking about schemes and fits, there's going to be a little bit of fluidity to all those situations.
All right, let's get to our next couple of picks here. Our favorite pick outside the top 12. I let you go first with the last one. I'll go first here. I'm going to go Kadarius Toney to the Saints at 28. First of all, you add another dynamic playmaker to that offense for Sean Payton. Yeah, they got to figure out who the quarterback is, but imagine all the different things that you can do when you've got Michael Thomas, Kadarius Toney, Alvin Kamara. You're trying to mix and match and do different things with these guys. Kadarius Toney, that's the kind of offense that would be exciting for me to be able to see him make that transition to the next level. That was a fit that I really liked. I really appreciate that. That one felt right to me when I read it.
Well, anytime you get a player like that, a weapon into the hands of Sean Payton, I think any of us football purists are really excited. And then Adam Trotman's back for a second year. And you obviously have Taysom Hill and his versatility. That could be a really fun group. But I'm going to go down in the trenches. We know it's going to be a tackle group. I like Christian Darrisaw taking a bus ride up to the Washington football team. I think he's just a good fit there. He's a guy we've been projecting to maybe the Steelers, maybe the Browns or the Bengals, just fits that AFC North profile. Washington, the NFC East is kind of the same way. This makes it 3 straight years going after kind of a local kid too. The Dwayne Haskins project didn't really work out. Chase Young 2 years ago or last year, being a local kid at DeMatha, and then Darrisaw, who has also a background from Virginia, Maryland. And let me tell you, I just want to see Darrisaw and Chase Young battle in practice. I think that's a pretty exciting little proposition for the summer.
He was a guy, Darrisaw, that had been kind of thrown into mock drafts like top 15 at one point. Like he wasn't talked about at all entering the season. I feel like you and Dane were really kind of ahead of the curve and talking about him back in September. And I feel like the buzz on him grew to the point where you were seeing him going to like the Chargers in mock drafts at 11 and 12. I feel like he's more like, closer to the back end of round 1 type of player in terms of overall talent in this draft, as opposed to like a top 15 guy. Do you kind of see it that way as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a couple guys in that conversation, whether it's Tevin Jenkins, Liam Eichenberg. I kind of think they're all in that 25 to 40 range.
Yep.
And it seems like Rashawn Slater has, kind of turned into that darling of moving up and going to the, Los Angeles Chargers. And I think that's who Matt had Slater going to there, who's been doing some work in free agency this week. So picking up Corey Linsley and giving Justin Herbert some protection.
That's what it's all about, trying to protect that quarterback. Let's get to the next one here. Most surprising selection. And like I said last week, this was a new category. Take surprise for however you want it. But I'll give you the floor here. Most surprising selection in this mock draft.
Well, some of the best questions in this draft, Fran. Who's wide receiver 4? Which you just answered in this mock. That's Kadarius Toney after the big 3 of Chase, Waddle, and Smith. And then the other thing is, who is cornerback 4? We know it's Surtain, Farley, and J.C. Horn. Excuse me.
Horn, yep.
A little brain fart right there. Who's receiver 4? Who's corner 4? And this corner 4 in this mock is Greg Newsome going to the Packers there at the end of round 1. I thought that was kind of a surprising pick because you can make a case for Asante Samuel fitting that zone scheme that Joe Barry is going to bring over, similar to Mike Pettin. Eric Stokes, certainly a good press man pedigree, blew everybody away with his speed at his pro day 2 weeks ago. Maybe it's an Elijah Molden, and a team like Green Bay can use some inside-outside versatility. Not so surprising that it's Greg Newsome, just surprising that we have a cornerback 4 and it's him. And no matter whose mock you look at, it's going to change on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And this area of the skill set, kind of perimeter players, receiver, corners, it's like Boggle, Fran. They seem to be mixing up each week, not because it's unsettled as it is, just there's a lot of really good, high-end prospects that I think have day 1 starting ability.
I'm going to go over to the AFC North here with mine. I'm going to go to the Baltimore Ravens at 27. Them selecting Jason Oweh, the pass rusher from Penn State. That just didn't feel like a Ravens pick to me. He's got like the frame that I think Baltimore looks for across the board. They typically trend a little bit bigger. But I think when you look at his lack of production, I don't think that that's a staple. You typically look at it, whether it's just under DaCosta over the last few years. I mean, remember, this is the team that took Jalen Ferguson, right, who set the record with sacks. They took Terrell Suggs. They've taken guys that have been really, really productive. Go back to last year. They took James Prochet from SMU. He was super productive. Biggie Marshall from USC the year before, super, super productive. Patrick Queen was really productive over 1 year as a starter.
You go ways back to like Terrell Suggs, who was the sack leader coming out.
Yep. So like under Ozzie Newsome, they would always select productive players. I don't know that they would necessarily trend towards a guy like Jason Oweh, especially in round one, as a guy that that they would target. But we'll see. That would be a surprising pick for me for sure. Looking at that team, and I got to look and see who was on the board from a pass rush standpoint. But that would be a guy that would surprise me a little bit. All right, let's get to our next category here. Our favorite connect the dots pick. I'll let you go here first.
All right, connecting some dots here and work with me here because we're going all through these constellations here.
Okay, all right.
The last time the Bears picked 20th overall in the first round, just coincidentally, they also took a guard tackle hybrid. Who was that? Big Kyle Long, 2013 out of Oregon, ended up being a 3-time Pro Bowler. And really that O-line hasn't been the same since he retired 2 years ago. They need offensive line, talent, depth, starters, swing tackles, everything. They need a lot on this offensive line. They go with Elijah Vera Tucker at that 20th pick. Again, guard tackle, versatility, very athletic. There's just kind of an interesting little parallel here. The last time they picked 20th, similar type of player. And I think they'll get a similar type of result.
By the way, that's a team that is okay with a tackle that doesn't have like the prototype in terms of body type, right? Charles Leno's been the left tackle there for forever. He's one of the squattier, like shorter arm tackles in the league, and he's been getting it done at a pretty high level, at a solid level for a long time. So I think when you look at a team that would be okay with a tackle that doesn't really look the part, I feel like Vera Tucker could fit that. Or if they end up sliding him to guard, then you get a good player there too. But I think that they would be okay trying him at tackle. I do like that one as a connect the dots pick. So with mine, I talked about the Ravens. I'm going to go with their arch rival and a team that Matt knows very, very well, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he's got them taking Najee Harris, the running back from Alabama. Harris it looks like a Steeler, right? I mean, the way that he plays, he is a physical downhill player, but then also he can impact the passing game. He's an athletic kid. He's got light feet for a guy that size. So, it's not like, Pittsburgh drafting the big slug. I mean, this is a guy that's athletic. He fits that mentality. But he also, again, still brings you a little bit of an extra dimension. This is a guy that can be a 3-down back. He can impact the passing game as a catcher and as a blocker. I like that fit, and he just looks the part as a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Now, I know he checks a lot of boxes. Excellent player on and off the field. Do you find him to be a little scheme specific as far as the run game at the next level? In the Steelers, a lot of inside zone, a lot of duo, a lot of gap scheme stuff with some one back power. They love to pull the backside on counter. I think that's a perfect run scheme
for him. Yep.
And as I'm just kind of going through it in my head, I don't know if I want him in a through and through outside zone scheme. And that's really not what Alabama did particularly well, or even very often. I just think the Steelers type of style fits him perfectly. I wasn't sure if you had a thought on that.
It does fit him perfectly. And it's funny. I kind of wrapped him up. It was like last Thursday. I watched the last I was going to watch of Najee Harris. And I just came away thinking like he's one of the best players in this class. And I do agree with you that he's not super scheme diverse. I don't know if I want him, running to the perimeter super, super often either. I don't know that he's that kind of back. But for most schemes, I got to think that he's going to be the top back in this class. And when he just checks so many boxes, I mean, there's not a lot of things where I look at and I'm like, man, like I wish he was a little bit better here. I guess just the overall, like the breakaway speed and suddenness you would question. But outside of that, man, like any other holes with Najee Harris? I don't think so.
And Najee, if you're listening, I'm not going to be the one to doubt you if you do go to his zone-based team. I think you'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, well, let's get to one final pick here, the Eagles selection at 6th overall. Interesting one. He's got the Eagles selecting wide receiver Jalen Waddle out of Alabama. Here's the blurb written by Matt. Jalen Hurts will be the Eagles' starting quarterback, and Philadelphia should have a very potent run game with his amazing downfield speed. A guy like Jalen Waddle would make it much more challenging for defenses to crowd the line of scrimmage. And I do agree with that blurb, by the way. When you add a guy like Jalen Waddle, you certainly are able to do a lot. I would love to be able to see him in the Eagles offense alongside Jalen Reagor in a yards after catch based offense with Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen. We've talked about that offense a lot over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. That pick would really excite a lot of people in Philadelphia, would be my guess.
Well, we have a quota of Jalen's to maintain in Philadelphia. We say goodbye to Jalen Mills off to New England. So we even it back out with a Jalen Waddle to pair with Jalen Reagor and Jalen Hurts on this offense. Just a really exciting prospect. I'm really excited to see him in Philadelphia and really just see him in the NFL, no matter where he lands. But if he could be in that dark green for us, I'm really excited. Somebody that has a good relationship with Jalen Hurts already with their time in Alabama. So I would expect them to pick things up kind of right away, and for him to proverbially be the most dangerous player in this offense from day one. I think we know what Reagor can do. We know what Sanders can do. We know what, Dallas Goedert and some of these other weapons can do. Jalen Waddle's the guy, in my opinion. And I'm so excited to see how you can use him, some different usage, some misdirection, some eye candy, and just a guy that can take the little thing and make a big play. And that's kind of something that we've been lacking here in Philadelphia for a couple of years. So a playmaker through and through.
More dynamic than Henry Ruggs a year ago, right? Coming out of the same program. I feel like he's got a little more play speed, and also not just the straight line explosiveness, but just the looseness in his hips, that lightning out of that, the lateral first step, his ability to just kind of put his foot in the ground and go is really impressive.
Yeah, much more creative and loose with the ball in his hands, whether a returner, whether the shallow cross stuff, the bubble screen stuff. He had a couple plays against Missouri this year.
Oh my goodness.
Where he was almost running circles around defenders. And that was more than anything Henry Ruggs did. Henry Ruggs would take a slant 80 yards. Absolutely. But that's more of linear speed. He's just going to kind of split right through the defense. Waddle is much more creative. Yeah. I think this guy is going to have a highlight each week that kind of makes you sit up in your chair and say, whoa, we got to get this guy the ball more. And I think he's going to be a really exciting player.
That's why, when you look at Tyreek Hill in Kansas City and the dynamic qualities he has, it's not just the straight line speed. It's did you see him put his foot in the ground and still maintain that top speed? Execute an athletic move at top speed and still maintain that momentum. That's the kind of juice that Waddle has.
Tyreek's a freak, and he's so fast in short areas. He steals yardage all over the place.
Right.
On little out routes. Just the separation, and then can get up the field for an extra 3-4 yards and get out of bounds. Just that little stolen yardage stuff because of how explosive you are, how confident you catch the ball, how quickly you transition up the field, just stealing the yardage out there. I would just love to see somebody generate easier offense for the Eagles, and Waddle can certainly do that.
No question. So a bunch of good picks there from Matt Williamson. You can go check that out again over on the Pro Football Network. Ben, as always, we will talk to you next week. Excited to dig more into the offensive line group with you and Dane for Tuesday's episode right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, well, great stuff there from Greg, from Matt, and from Ben. We're going to wrap things up with one question from you at home. We're going to go to RJ Field 11, who left a 5-star review saying, thanks for all of the great work year-round. It seems like the major trait when transitioning to the NFL for wide receivers that's always talked about is getting off press coverage. And it seems like the best route runners in the league do this with short area quickness and suddenness. This seems to be more Devontae Smith style compared to Jamar Chase, who we always hear about his play strength. With Chase not being the biggest guy, why do you think it seems like the consensus is that Chase is better than Smith, even though Smith has more of those qualities always mentioned with the top tier guys in the NFL? Is there anything that we can't see on the highlights that shows up consistently on the All-22? RJ, this is an outstanding question, and I would expect nothing less from our loyal listeners, as they always are listening to everything that we have to, not only that we have to say, but our guests that we always bring on. And if you listen not just to this show, but over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, I'm always talking with former players and current players and coaches, trying to get a sense of the things that they valued at the position and the things that they see as very important. And you're right. Everybody is talking about press coverage. How do you beat press coverage? And, beating the jam, no matter who you talk to, they'll say it starts from the ground up. Against press coverage, does he win with his feet by displaying quickness to beat the defensive back off the line? Or even better, does he win with his upper body? Can he use his shoulders to get skinny, trying to lower the surface area, gain ground vertically, and attack upfield cleanly? Does he have the hands to counter the jam and fight through pressure to get into the route? So you're talking about two different aspects here, right? You've got the lower body with the quickness and the quick feet, but then also the upper body, knowing how to position your torso, position your chest, reduce the surface area for an off or for a corner to be able to strike you, and then also have that play strength to be able to fight through it. So there are a couple different ways to skin a cat there, but I think I go back to a couple different people that I've talked to about this topic. Amani Toomer, former New York Giants wide receiver, came on the show last year, and this is a direct quote. I actually pulled it real quick just to help answer this question. He said, for bigger wide receivers, that's usually their struggle, is to get off the line of scrimmage clean. You want to come off the jam with an advantage. You don't want to be even or behind. You want them to be actively catching up. For quicker guys, that can be easy. For bigger guys, that can be a little bit more difficult. There's hundreds of ways of getting off the line. It's a receiver's job to figure out which way works for them. I liked using my hands, but I didn't try to think about it too much. If a DB reacted one way, I knew how to respond without thinking. It was just a natural reaction. So that is the big question for Ja'Marr Chase is, okay, how do we further, improve ways for me to get off the line of scrimmage? And it's going to be different for all these guys. It takes me back to a conversation I had with Chris Long just last week about pass rushers. All these guys, you're going to have a different way of attacking a corner, just like a pass rusher would have a different way of attacking an offensive tackle. Depending on your body type, depending on your skill set, you're going to have different tools in your toolbox. I think when you look at Ja'Marr Chase, he's going to have to find ways to be able to win with his play strength, but don't diminish his short area quickness. Don't diminish his ability to win with his feet. I thought he had some of that ability to be able to win with snap, win with suddenness early, and be able to get off the jam. Remember, this guy was a young kid. He's only going to be a 21-year-old rookie. So if you go back to when he was last on the field, he was like 19 years old, his first real year as a full-time starter in that offense. So I think when you look at trying to project him moving forward into the NFL, that is going to be a little bit of a question mark. The question with Devontae Smith is, while he might have more of that short area quickness at his size, will that be a detriment? That's the question everybody's asking with Devontae Smith. If he's 175 pounds, if he's 170, if he's 165 pounds, is that going to be a detriment for him in terms of getting him off the line of scrimmage? Now, on the other hand, when you look at that, you're going to play Ja'Marr Chase as your X receiver. You can line him up everywhere. You can line him up X, Z, slot. With Devontae Smith, very unlikely that you're going to see him take a ton of reps at the X receiver position where he's up on the line of scrimmage and the DB can get into his face right at the snap. It's very unlikely that a team would ask him to do that time and time and time again. You're going to line him up in the slot where the DB is going to back him off a little bit. You're going to line him up at the Z where you can move him around, where he's off the line a little bit, and all of a sudden he's got a little bit more, a little bit extra space to be able to work with. So yes, I completely agree. Beating press coverage, very, very important. But again, it all comes down to the traits that we see. How do we separate that from what we've seen so far? What can they do for us moving forward? So Ja'Marr Chase, yeah, we didn't see him consistently win against press back in 2019. That being said, we did see quick feet. We know he's very competitive. We know he's very strong. All the marks coming out of him from LSU, everything he talks about the work ethic and his love for the game. You can project moving forward that he's going to figure out a way to be able to get off a jam, that he's going to be able to find a way to beat press coverage. Devontae Smith, he's got that same work ethic. He's got that same football character, right? We talked about that last week here on the show, talking about his football intelligence and how he read defenses and things like that. But he's doing it with a different kind of body type. And so that's why I think a lot of people will trend more towards Ja'Marr Chase, because you're trending more towards a body type that we've seen, that we feel more comfortable with. There aren't a lot of examples. There aren't a lot of case studies of receivers as small as Devontae Smith. And when I say small, I don't mean short. I don't mean stubby. He's got 31.25-inch arms. That's not the longest in the world. That's not the shortest in the world. 175 or less pounds. I mean, that's a tough body type to really feel comfortable with. You might be okay with it, but not everybody will be. And I think that's why when you hear media analysts talking and there's all these rankings and mock drafts and things like that, more often than not, you're going to see Ja'Marr Chase go ahead of Devontae Smith. But both guys are great, great players. And I think that kind of discussion is going to be interesting to watch. And my guess is a lot of receiver coaches will feel differently about that. When you're looking at Chase and you're looking at Smith and trying to project how you're going to use them. Like I said, the roles are going to be a little bit different in the NFL and what you're going to ask them to do. But RJ, that was a great question. Thanks so much for dropping it over on our Apple Podcast page. I want to give a quick shout out as well to Errors and Misconceptions, who also left a 5-star review saying, and really, I don't want to get into this whole thing. They left an outstanding comment, some really kind words about how much they enjoy the show and how much they enjoy our analysis. Me personally, I like to think of myself as a bit of a humble person. I'm not going to go ahead and read all of the nice things that you wrote about me and wrote about the show, but I wanted to let you know through here that I did read the comment. I did not miss it. It was great to see, and I'm going to take your advice. I'm not going to let this get to my head. I'm going to get back to work. So that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. Thanks to everybody for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll be back early next week. We're going to be breaking down some more offensive linemen earlier in the week. We've got Blueprint as well early on Tuesday morning, so make sure you're joining us right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
In just over 3 years, Eagle's Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.